Hello everyone, it's Danny Wills from Boxing Science and welcome to another episode of Boxing Science TV. This episode is dedicated to heavyweight boxing because it's really exciting at the moment. We've got Anthony Joshua leading the way. We've got Deontay Wilder and Tyson Fury just had a historic matchup in LA. We've had David Haye and Tony Bellew who have two big fights over the last 2 years. And there's also another rematch this weekend with Dillian Whyte and Derek Chisora too. So heavyweight boxing is really booming at the moment. Now, I wanted to dedicate this episode to heavyweight boxing because this phrase of within boxing is that heavyweight fighters are totally different. It's like a totally different sport. You've got to train them differently. You've got to give them different tactics. The energy demands are a lot different as well. And not only does that come from a boxing perspective, but also comes from a strength and conditioning perspective as well. We've got to be careful on the exercises that we select, different conditioning methods as well. And also, they have the luxury of not having to make weight, and sometimes they look to put on more mass as they go through their careers and go up to towards world level. But you've got to put on that mass in the right way. Of course, muscle mass that I'm talking about. So I've decided to put together this episode of top 5 tips for anybody that's training heavyweight boxers, or if you're a heavyweight boxer yourself. You should find this video quite useful as I offer tips on different areas that you need to focus on in strength and conditioning. Now, before I get into this, I'd just like to tell you about our Train Like Champion Remastered program. Train Like Champion is our 10-week online program that consists of 5 handbooks across strength and conditioning, fitness, nutrition, movement training, and also programming and monitoring. And this program has been accessed by hundreds of coaches all over the world and has been hugely popular over the last 2 years. Since 2016, we've extended our research and our experience of working in boxing and combat sports, but also the content as well. The content's gone up levels since we first started Boxing Science. So we wanted to make some big improvements to our program. So at the moment, we are offering a launch offer where you can get the Train Like Champion Remastered at 50% discount and also get a free Boxing Science t-shirt as well. This offer runs out on Friday the 4th of January. So if you're interested, take a look at the link in the description. And then also watch this trailer around about a minute and a half to tell you a little bit more about what to expect from the program.
Do you want your training to produce guaranteed results? Train Like a Champion is a 10-week sports science program proven to increase strength, speed and fitness for boxers and combat athletes. Since 2016, the popular online program has been accessed by hundreds of coaches all over the world. And due to our team extending our knowledge, research and experience, we have made improvements to our program and we're proud to launch Train Like a Champion Remastered. We've enhanced the training experience, added monitoring tools and much more to make it even easier to apply the boxing science methods in your training environment. The program consists of 5 ebooks in strength, conditioning, movement, nutrition and in programming and testing. All with visual demonstrations, underpinning science, video support and detailed programming that's easy to understand and integrate into your training schedule. This makes Train Like a Champion the most comprehensive program on the market that will not only improve your performance but will also save you time and money, as this is your chance to have a sports science team all in one place and at a click of a button. For a limited time only, we're offering a massive 50% discount and a free Boxing Science t-shirt. Whether it's a Christmas present or treat for yourself, this is the perfect way to kickstart 2019 in your pursuit for world level performance.
So here are my top 5 tips for training heavyweight boxers or tall athletes. The first one is be very selective on what exercises you use, especially for lower body. So if an athlete, like a taller athlete, is doing a squat, they'd have to work a lot harder to get it down into that deep squat position, get them hips just below the knees and the upper leg parallel with the floor, they've got to work so much harder than your average athlete. And in particular, it's harder on hip flexibility. Due to the femur length, it's very hard to get into that deep squat position without a forward lean. This makes like exercises such as like the back squat quite ineffective, but also dangerous as well. A lot of loading going on through the spine. So if I was going to load up the lower body, I'd use possibly a front squat or something like a landmine squat or goblet squat as well. And then my key exercise that I'd use the trap bar deadlift. Also, you need to consider doing this from small blocks. So sometimes we'll put this in specific maximal strength phases, but even when we're looking to lift from the floor, we might just put on like one block. Like I said, taller athletes have got to work a lot harder than shorter athletes, got to cover more distance lifting that weight. So to make the exercise a little bit more effective, a little bit more safe, we had like one little block to just give them that little lift up to make sure that they're not having to travel too far whilst they're deadlifting. Speaking of like partial range lifts, that brings us on to number 2, which is using some sort of partial range lift or accommodating resistance. Because lever lengths are a lot longer in taller athletes, they'll find it more difficult to drive through that sticking point and still create force towards the end of the movement. So for example, a dumbbell chest press, they might be really strong from the bottom, but they've got to really drive through that sticking point to make sure they increase their force at the top. Now, when we're talking about strengthening the boxer, we're looking to make them punch harder. And a lot of punches are either mid-range or towards the end range of like your arm. So when you're flexing and extending, your arm's often like towards going towards full extension when you impact, especially on straight shots. So it's important that we still increase the force towards the end of that movement. And if we're struggling to get through that sticking point because our lever lengths are a little bit longer, then we're going to find it a little bit more difficult. So we need to make sure that we're training through that sticking point to make sure that we're not underloading and we're getting stronger towards the end point of our lifts. So using something like accommodating resistance, that means like lifting with chains or lifting with bands. That'll train our ability to drive through that sticking point with acceleration and make the lift harder towards the top of the movement as well. And as well to use partial range lifts such as floor press or lifting from the racks. This would be really beneficial for increasing force at the end range of punches. So moving on to number 3, we're going to talk about conditioning. Because we're working with heavier athletes, they might struggle with reaching the intensities needed to get up into the red zone to promote them central adaptations. So if they're like running for shorter intervals, let's say 1 or 2 minute intervals, they might need to run it around about 17, maybe going all the way up to 20 kilometers per hour for them to hit the red zone. Now, because they're a little bit heavier, there's large impact forces going through the joints, so they might find this uncomfortable, or they might not be able to do it at all. Even if they did find it comfortable, there's high impact forces going through the joints. This could cause injury or overuse injuries as well. So if you're going to train heavyweight boxing, doing some high intensity interval training, there's a few little things that you can do. One is go for longer intervals, and this will suit their energy demands whilst they're boxing as well, because the volume of punches and the intensity of the bounce is a lot lower than other weight categories. So doing like longer intervals between 4 and 6 minutes, maybe going all the way up to 8 minutes, this will reduce the amount of impact forces our heavyweight athletes are putting through the joints. Another one is to put the incline up. So putting the incline up to around about 3.5% will help our athletes reach the intensity needed to get up into the red zone without blasting the treadmill. So if you do work towards shorter intervals, let's say if you do start working on 2-minute intervals, which heavyweight boxers can still do, you just got to make sure that we're making it harder without putting the speed up. So putting the incline up will help us reach the red zone when appropriate. So moving on to number 4 now, and it's all about weight. As I mentioned in the intro, heavyweight boxers have the luxury of not having to make weight. So they often creep up fight by fight, either intentionally or unintentionally. You've got to make sure that there's a certain weight target before the camp for each fight, because you don't want to be putting on, let's say, more than 5, maybe 10 pounds between fights, because you'll feel a massive difference in the ring. You know, if you're putting on 10 pounds between fights, you might feel great after round 2, 3, 4, but once you get past the middle rounds, that extra bit of weight, you know, that's going to start fatiguing you. So make sure that you've got a target before each camp. Now, we would still encourage heavyweight boxers to keep putting on mass, because that's the nature of the sport today. The top level guys are getting bigger and bigger and bigger. They're walking around 17.5, 18 stone, and that's probably at a minimum at the moment. So you need to gradually put that mass on, but make sure that it's functional mass. So when you're putting on, let's say, muscular hypertrophy, you can't do like a normal bodybuilding style training. So like doing between 10 and 12 reps and just going through a hypertrophy block, because we want to gain size, but we want to keep our speed at the same time. So doing different methods, cluster training, that's let's say if we're working 6 or 8 reps, we'd split that up into clusters of either 3 or 4 repetitions. This makes sure that we're getting right intensity, we're encouraging maximal force development, but we're also getting that volume there that we're needing for muscular hypertrophy. Also try occlusion training, which is blood flow restriction, and you can increase muscle mass without working at heavier weights. How occlusion training works, it's blood flow restriction to the muscles, and what will happen is that the type 1 muscle fibers, slow twitch muscle fibers, will fatigue first, and as you're working through hypertrophy, you're targeting the type 2, the fast twitch muscle fibers. So without doing too much weight load and not doing too much volume on our hypertrophy training, we're actually targeting fast twitch muscle fiber hypertrophy, and this is really beneficial for athletes. And then just make sure that you're keeping speed in the program. You're still doing plyometrics, you're still doing speed lifts as well, and you're not doing too much hypertrophy in one training camp. You aim for muscular hypertrophy across a range of training camps, and you're still having that maximal strength and that speed element in there as well. Now, last but no means least, and our 5th and final point, is when we're putting on this muscle mass, we need to make sure that we're working on peripheral adaptations, working on how the muscle extracts and utilises energy for performance. Because if you don't focus on your conditioning at the muscle, this will affect acidosis, lactic acid build-up. So you might have seen big heavyweight boxers load up on the punches and then end up blowing out a little bit. Now, this is basically their lactic acid, the acidosis building up in their muscles, and this is what's creating fatigue. So you want to make sure that you're targeting peripheral adaptations through doing something like 30-second maximal sprints. As I mentioned before, due to our athletes being a little bit heavier, it might be quite risky doing like high velocity sprints. So if you're doing 30-second maximal sprints out on a track and your running mechanics aren't right and you're running and you're 16, 17 stone, you know, this injury waiting to happen. But let's say if you're on a curve, make sure that you warm up properly. I'd look to do some 30-second max out sprints on a watt bike, or doing it like on a prowler as well, if we're working with heavier athletes, and let's say if the running mechanics aren't as good. Okay, so that brings us to the end of this episode on heavyweight boxing. Hope you've enjoyed it and found it useful for if you're working with heavyweight boxers, or found it interesting if you don't. Like I said in the introduction, we've got 50% discount on our Train Like a Champion Remastered program. The link is in the description. And if you want to know a little bit more about it, we've got Jordan Gill, Anthony Fowler, saying testimonials on how boxing science has benefited them and why you should buy the Train Like a Champion program.
When I first went into boxing science, I said, I want to be a world-class performer. We put together a plan. We said in 4 years' time, you're going to have world-level fitness, world-level strength. It's come before that, I feel, and it's still developing into an elite level.
Strength and conditioning team at Boxing Science at Brains, and they've really helped push me to that zone where you get to in fights where years ago I don't think I trained as hard as what I do now. What I've noticed is it's tapering them down great.
If I was giving any advice to a boxer, I'd say get your fitness levels up with this program. This is the closest thing that you're going to get to be actually in this gym and training at the level that I'm training at, the level that Anthony Fowler's training at.
I'd really recommend the Train Like a Champion program. It's next level. Boxing Science, I believe they're the leading brand in world boxing. I genuinely believe that.